Well, good morning and welcome back to Morning at NTV. Idris Matusega is my name, and to keep with the conversation, go to our social media platforms, that is on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and all those new platforms that you are on. We are there. Use the hashtag Morning at NTV and look out for NTV Uganda. Now, as every Friday it is, when you see my face, you know we are discussing the arts industry in Uganda, the business side of it, the entertainment side of it, and kind of making you understand what is really going on in the country. If you didn't know, after a while of pleading, cries, so many interviews that we've done here, the copyright law has been presented in Parliament. Finally, the artists have some hope. Now, Norbert Mao presented the long-awaited Copyright and Neighboring Amendment Bill 2025 for its first reading in the Parliament. Copyright has been and will always play a critical role in ensuring that society's creative works are preserved. Virtually all artists from time immemorial have been conventional in terms of finances. Now, this Copyright Amendment Bill is Jeff Ekongot, music analyst, and Andrew Kagwa, the arts journalist of Daily Monitor. For you to be part of the conversation, I remind you again, go to our social media platforms. Tell us, what do you know about the copyright law in Uganda, and what are your feelings about this amendment bill and the step that has been taken? Share your experience, share your thoughts, share your questions, and probably we shall be able to answer them right on Morning at NTV. Jeff, good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
Good to have you here today.
Glad to be here too.
Before we enter the conversation, just remind our viewers who you are, what you do, and what are your best interests in this arts industry.
Thank you. My name is Geoffrey Jeff Ekongot. I am a music business advocate. I am currently with the Uganda Musicians Association as the executive director at the Secretariat. I have been in the industry for pretty much about 25 years. Started out as an artist and spent most of those years supporting the growth of the industry, both internationally and locally.
Well, after the first reading, Speaker Among referred the bill to the Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee for a thorough scrutiny. Are you satisfied with what's going on? Do you even have any idea about this, where it's going, and probably some of those key aspects of the bill? Do you feel they will satisfy the industry?
Yes, most definitely. It's been a long journey. We've been very actively lobbying in the background to ensure that
tirelessly.
This law is amended. You see, this law was amended again around 2006. I think that was August 2006 when it was passed. And after we had an old law, a colonial law. And when it was passed, that was the transition between analog and digital. It was the beginning of the digital era. And you know the digital era right now pretty much holds everything, but most especially the music industry. And as the digital era started growing, coming of age, we realized that all the things that we needed to capture that are now shaping the industry were missed out in the law. And not just the digital era, but also so many other things. Over the years, the creators have come to start appreciate the copyright and how it works, and they realize they've made so many mistakes. And these mistakes were because also the law didn't give them an opportunity to take advantage of those things. So the need to change, to amend the law started growing and growing, and we are very happy now that we've gotten to this point where the amendment bill is being presented in Parliament for the first reading. There are lots of wins, I would say, in that law, because so many things we've been pushing for have been actually included in the proposals. However, there are also some losses. Some of the things that we had pushed for were not included, and we still think there's room, there's a possibility. We are still hopeful, and we are still going to push now that the bill
of course we have to. The interesting bit about what you've just said, is the amendments that keep on happening. In 2006, of course, the amendment happened, the copyright law was passed, but for all that period, from 2006, more than 20 years, if my math is right, more than coming to 20 years, and still we've been grappling with inefficient application of this law. What hope or what guarantee does the artist of today have that the amendment in 2025 is going to wash away all the problems that the 2006 amendment had, and now this time everything is going to be perfect?
Well, the law is only one part of the equation of growing the, the sector, the creative industry, and the law by itself cannot magically fix everything.
Indeed.
A very big part of the law working starts with the stakeholders understanding how it works. For example, I know that so many stakeholders don't even understand that there was already a law. And there's already a law as we speak that we are amending. And that law is very functional. Yeah. And unfortunately, most of the stakeholders haven't taken advantage of the law. So the law, even if it's amended, it won't really help if the stakeholders don't take the time to make sense of it. So it's going to start with filling the knowledge gap. And then once the knowledge gap is filled and the stakeholders can really make use of the law, then it will help. But if they don't, it will continue to be a sleeping law, like the current one. The current one has really been in slumber. Yeah. Actually, so many artists right now continuously mention that we don't have a law. The truth is that we've had it, and it's there, and so many cases have been won through the same law. For example, you remember the Maurice Kiria case where he won MTN and I think Airtel.
Against the caller tune.
Yes, on the caller tune. There are famous cases. Katatumba won as well. So many people won using this law. And most recently, the Jamaican artist also was awarded up to almost 1.5 billion using the current law.
Cautions.
So, yeah, the improvements will serve those who use them.
And you know, one of the key factors that you've mentioned is that the ignorance, the sheer ignorance of the artists themselves about thinking, because most of the people that you meet, even today, when you are having a discussion about copyright, they come from a space and kind of a view of there is no copyright law. It's about Yamba. This thing is not happening. Blah 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 blah. And Andrew, you have just joined us. I want to bring you into the conversation at this point. What do you think more sensitization needs to be done before even fighting for the amendment? Because people seem not to know that the law does actually exist.
Yeah. First, apologies for showing up late.
Better late than never.
Yeah, but copyright, Oka wasn't in the industry, I think, by the time this...
In 2006?
In 2006.
You were a toddler then?
I wasn't a toddler, but I was in school. I wasn't. So I've ended up reading mostly about what happened at the time. And I do not know which words were used when it was being pitched to artists, but I feel like whatever word was used then, it was very wrong because it painted the wrong picture. There is this perception that the moment copyright, I don't even think there is a world where copyright doesn't exist. And for Uganda, because Ugandans usually say copyright doesn't exist in Uganda, and you're like you always have it. It always exists. And then they say the law doesn't exist, and you're like, it actually does. So whichever way this whole thing was pitched back in 2006, I think they made it look like we fix this. You're getting a golden goose or something like that. And we are still on that perception, and for some reason every new artist that comes into the industry buys into the gospel, and after buying into the gospel, they buy into the fact that we do not have a law, and so it continues like that. So I believe even before the sensitization, the artists need to actually understand what exactly the copyright law is, and they need to understand that it exists, and they need to understand that its effectiveness is not going to turn you into an overnight millionaire. Because I remember I had to explain to Palazzo that, dude, Mariah Carey still performs and she still tours, because he was saying his Happy Birthday song would have retired him early if Uganda had a copyright law. And I'm like, Mariah Carey has one of the most listened to Christmas albums for the past, now they are 30 years. And she still tours and she still performs, and she's not a billionaire. Despite the fact that they have a very, very tight law that actually works. So before the sensitization, people need to be explained to what exactly this whole thing is, that they understand it.
And that brings me to my question. Jeff, what are some of the key clauses or articles in this amendment that we are pushing for?
Well, there are several. For example, there is the domestication of treaties. There are multiple treaties that Uganda is a signatory to that support the operationalization of the copyright and amendment bill law, but they had never been domesticated or sort of brought home to And for example, the Berne Convention, the Beijing Treaty. The Beijing Treaty supports things related to audiovisual works, that's films, music videos, all those things. Then the Marrakesh Treaty that supports persons with disability. For example, the blind, they can be able to access literary works. They can be able to access so many things without having to pay for them. They can basically apply them in using accessible means to those people. And then two, there's CRBTs. We've been actively lobbying for the CRBTs to be more equitable and fair. The telcos and aggregators have been exploiting artists for a very long time. We've actively spoken about this in many forums, and we actually even went to Parliament at some point until Parliament agreed with us that there was a lot of unfairness. And eventually we got to propose that all these arrangements to do with CRBTs must give our artists at least a minimum of 60%. And
for the upcoming artist who is not familiar with the industry, what are CRBTs? CRBTs are coloring back tones. That's the ringtones that people use. Like we had talked about earlier, the Conscience and Morris Kiria.
Yes, actually, for example, Conscience case was purely built on the CRBTs, and now he was awarded almost 1.5 billion just for coloring back tones. So the telcos hopefully are now going to play fair, because the law is going to change the rules. We borrowed inspiration from Kenya. Kenya has a similar law, and we felt maybe we could take inspiration from that. Actually, we also borrowed from other countries around the continent that are applying the same rules. The other area where we've been pushing is contracts. Very many legends in the music industry, in the film industry, are poor today because they signed terrible contracts 20 years ago. Most of the Kadongo Kamu superstars, the Sebatas, you can tell now they're poor. Some of the biggest artists we know, like the Chameleons, most of the music that we've grown to associate them with, they don't own it, because when they were still starting out and growing, they signed terrible contracts out of desperation. But also there were smarter people then who took advantage of their ignorance of copyright and exploited them into contracts. Now there's an option for revision of reverting of rights back to the copyright owner after 20 years. And music is like wine. As it gets older, for the good one, the good music, it becomes more valuable. So bigger catalogs will revert You know, these catalogs will revert back to the owners, and that's a huge win. There's also a win around mandatory requirement for contracts to be signed. That was also a big part of that issue of the way they were handling contracts. Some of these either promoters or publishers of the time were very exploitative. They would get you to sign. You don't even get a copy of this contract, and then the next thing you know, you realize you don't have control over your career. And so now it's going to be a requirement that these contracts get registered, and so that, you know, there's a clear record of what's going on.
You know, and sorry to cut you short.
Yeah, and so many other issues, like, for example, orphan works. The issue of orphan works supports people who want to use music legally, but they cannot find the owners. So now there's a clause that provides for you to legally use music for where you can't find the owner, and in case they show up, they'll still be able to get compensated.
Well, talking about contracts, you mentioned that most artists, and especially the musicians, because when we talk about artists, it's not only the singers, it's the producers, the filmmakers, the painters. So many art forms are now cropping up. The issue of contracts, and I'll bring in Andrew on this issue. Jeff mentioned that certain artists either signed contracts without knowing what is in the contracts. They never had a copy of their own contracts, and they have found themselves in unfair arrangements. Does the bill strictly or entirely solve this issue, or are there deeper, other fundamental aspects of management that need to be kind of cleaned up?
One, there are fundamental management issues that need to be dealt with. One, most artists, even to date, still sign contracts without a lawyer present. And I've dealt with an artist signing a contract. Trust me, most of them do not read those contracts. They usually look for the page that has the money, and the moment they see the money, they go all the way down and sign off. And then, of course, they're told that you're supposed to sign each and every page. They sign each and every page. One signing each and every page is proof that you accept everything that's on that page. So that needs to be dealt with. People need to have lawyers with them when they are signing. But of course, when it comes to, much as the contracts artists signed were very exploitative, like at the end of the day, even with our bad state of the Ugandan industry, you could argue that artists still benefited more from their music than the people that they signed the contracts with, because most of the people they signed the contracts with were expecting to make their money from, one, distributing the music like physically. I do not think Kaseo Kirao's family are collecting any of the money from royalties that's coming from streaming from any of the artists they gave money. I do not think they even still collect that money from UPRS, regardless of how much they could be owning. So for me, I find an issue with that. Like, yeah, music is going to go, like, the catalogs are going to go back to being owned by the rightful artists that wrote, composed the music. But even the people that paid so much for this catalog have not even benefited as half as the people that the catalog is going to go back to. And unfortunately, I do not even think that the people that paid for this catalog have a person that can listen to them in the industry, because everyone is looking at them as predators. But
I guess that's not really fair to what happened at the time. You know, most of those contracts you're referring to were during the analog era, and those were really cash and carry contracts. That time, once a promoter or publisher like Kaseo signed an artist, right there they would promote the album or the release, and then they would print the cassettes and sell them within weeks. They would not even, actually most times they would recoup their investment in just a matter of weeks and months, because the demand, it was the
demand was high.
The distribution mechanisms
and also the monopoly.
The pre-digital distribution systems were very clear.
My point is that in the long run, the owners of the catalogs have still made much more money from this music than the people that paid for it then. Like, I mean, Chameleone has performed that music for nearly 20-something years. Fred Sebert has performed that music for all those years. Like, we cannot even be sure of the last coin the Kasiokira family got from that music. And yet, right now, when we are talking, like, it usually sounds like these people are slaves to these contracts.
Very true. That perspective holds. However, a big part of that problem has nothing to do with the artists. It's mostly to do with failure to adapt. Most of those older publishers were pre-digital or analog sort of publishers. So when the digital era came, they did not make sense of it. They failed to jump in and, for example, republish that music digitally. That means sign up with CMOs and sign up with global distributors and probably even re-release that music. So most of them are not even very active online. I have made efforts to engage some publishers recently, and they are still grappling on how to make sense of the digital era. And they could be making a lot of money because a lot of those songs are still being streamed. There's a lot of nostalgia around that music. And nothing stops them from doing that.
Do they know they own it?
They do actually, very seriously. We've engaged in so many forums with them, and they always come up and they've made claims. And one testament is when they try to sell a certain catalog to, I think, General Sally, and that's when they found out that they had sold air. The publishers came up and said, hey, wait a minute, these Kadonkamu artists who claim to have sold you their music, they sold air because they don't own this music. We do own the music. So they are very active, quietly, but active whenever there's an opportunity to monetize. It's just that this all digital space is still giving them a hard time. They haven't made sense of how to, fully transition into it. But there's a whole new generation that's coming up that will fill that space
and now they have
not
to
make
give up the
mistakes they made.
Hopefully. And just going back to what you mentioned earlier about the treaties.
Yes.
Break it down for us a little more, because when I hear treaties, how does then that apply to me as an individual artist? Because the treaty sounds very high-level management, executive level. So to me as an artist, maybe a Kadonkamu artist who probably is not that literate, how does that help him?
That's a good question. Let's start with, say, the Beijing Treaty. The Beijing Treaty supports enforcement of copyright around audiovisual works. In this law, one of the implications, say, for filmmakers is that actors now who are previously being paid just for their role during the shoot can now claim residual income in terms of royalties even when the movie is released. And that doesn't just mean released locally, also internationally. Let's say Ugandan producer releases a film on Netflix. Now the actor can now claim residual income from every time that movie is screened. The same applies to, let's say, producers. Producers have been complaining for a long time that, they are they are the foundation of the industry. All the music starts with them, and many years later, they find themselves broke. You had the stories of Washington. Yeah. Now the law supports them to claim royalties from their works beyond
internationally, beyond the borders of Uganda.
Yes, beyond the initial performance fees. So they can be able to, for example, and how that is put in practice. let's say an artist that you collaborated with released the music, and the perception previously was that you have to pursue this artist and beg them to accommodate you. With us, for example, co-signing the band convention, now you can just write what they call a letter of direction to any CMO globally and tell them, you know what, I've searched online, I found my music is being used in your country, and I am a copyright stakeholder on that music. Please, I own 50% of that work, and here is proof, and they will start redirecting income. In fact, if they can even do that in retrospect, that means if there was a certain amount that was given, they can hold off giving a certain share to that the previous claimant, and until they balance it out. So it's a very interesting development for us, and it makes things much smoother for us when we are working even with online platforms, YouTube, Spotify, because these platforms are all over the world. When we domesticate these treaties, it means now we are, on the same level of execution when making claims. The other issues, for example, takedowns. If your music is being infringed in any country around the world, now with the domestication of these treaties, we are able to also apply the same, there are clauses that support takedown, and their operationalization is through these laws that are recognized globally. You can write a letter to any platform globally, instructing them to take down certain music if you feel that it's infringing on your copyright. And because Uganda is a signatory to the same laws, then it would be implemented seamlessly. So it's a very good development.
Indeed it is. And in the mother of industries, entertainment industries, which is Hollywood, such duties are undertaken by unions and guilds. Is that the same thing that's going to happen here in Uganda? Are we using our CMOs and other unions? For collective cases, our CMO is very active. For example, for music, Uganda Performing Rights Society is active, and they will be pursuing that. They are members of CISAC, which is the International Society for Composers. And then also we have a CMO for film, which is right here at the National Theatre. And they can support in that area as well. So but for direct licensing, copyright holders can still engage directly with the support of the law. For example, when it comes to CRBTs, the CMOs were previously not supporting artists with telcos, and they would engage directly. Now with the changes, a copyright owner can be able to engage directly, but with more power now than previously. Andrew, a few months ago, the famous Eddie Kenzo was around town talking about a copyright bill. Is this the same bill?
No, there were two things he was talking about. He once talked about amendments, and then they talked about a copyright management system. I think that's the right word.
Yes. Yeah. Because even the management system has to be under the bill.
Yeah.
It can't be isolated on its own.
Yes, so it's not the same thing. And besides that, because like artists have been very vocal when it comes to copyright, and yet suspiciously our artists are some of the best abusers of copyright. You just said in the new amendments, you talked about one amendment which I felt like kind of existed, and it was almost an issue of morality. Say a songwriter and a producer getting their share.
More of a gentleman's agreement in a way, I would say.
Yeah, but what used to happen was more of a, actually it was more of a gentleman's agreement, which you as a producer, you are forced to be a gentleman.
Indeed.
But I'm going to tell you a story that I have a feeling you have an idea of. Like, a movie producer reached out to local people, like a movie producer from the UK, and they wanted to use a Ugandan song, and So they go to the artist and they got the music, but when it came to the documentation wasn't complete.
Yeah.
The artist was filling themselves in as the producers and the songwriter. And for the other guys, that did not make sense. So this deal went on for a very long time because the artist could not really tell them who actually wrote the song, who produced the song, or who are the other part of the team that produced the song. Like the artist was feeling everything out as himself, like he was everything. But that's
possible. There are independent artists who don't have a big budget, and I could go, and right now with the technology that is available, I can be in my bedroom, record my song, write it, produce it, and release it.
In some very rare cases, I agree with the sentiments they were having. Yeah. Because the Western music industry is mostly run by record labels, and the major record labels pretty much own like 80% of the Western music industry. Yeah. So they are used to seeing credits, even when you don't own the rights. At least there is what they call moral rights. That, like, let's say the case he has presented. Let's say the artist actually owns 100% of the rights, but they still work with a producer under what they call a work for hire agreement. In that work for hire agreement, the producer may have forfeited their rights to collecting royalties. So in that case, the artist would claim 100%, but they would still have to credit the producer, so that the producer retains their
Jeff,
even if there was a third-party songwriter who forfeited their right to collect royalties, they would still have to credit them, so that it's very clear that they own 100% on the basis of work for hire agreements.
So anyway, I'm not dismissing the fact.
And they would have to actually attach these work for hire agreements.
Definitely, Jeff, I'm not dismissing the fact that that is a possibility. I work with you, then you forfeit your ownership. Yeah. But also I'm talking about the fact that there are artists who can do the things by themselves.
Yes, it's true there.
Key example, APAS. Here, I've seen him talk about how he produces his own music, writes his own music, and publishes it. So in an instance of that case, does that again reflect on the lack of knowledge or understanding of our industry here in Uganda from such companies?
That's how I was coming to.
Please.
Like one, it's quite a very common case when it comes to Uganda. Yeah. Technically, every song you get from Uganda, everyone is the songwriter, the producer, like they're everything.
Even away from the songs, the movies. Yes. We've seen directors, written by, camera by.
So because of that, most of our songs that get used, say in Hollywood or what, get underpaid because they usually get to keep some money just in case someone shows up. Someone shows up and they need to avoid that bad press for their film. So one time I got a chance to talk to a producer, and a producer actually told me artists usually force them to sign off their rights. Like, the more you bring English into these things, they'll create a situation where they stop working with you. Which
the artists?
Yeah. Which is partly the reason why the moment most artists notice that there is a producer who has also started making music, they also find a way of avoiding him, because in their mind, you're competing with them, you're competing for what they want. So there are some artists that actually know these things, and they've been cheating their producers. Like, they literally force you out. So in this case of the amendments, like, it's a very good thing, but it has always been existing, and many of them have been technically abusing it knowingly. So is it going to be a matter of policy that now, when I was a producer on a song, like, I don't know how the enforcement of this whole thing
I think a very big part of it will start with the advocacy.
Yeah.
In the past, we didn't even know where to draw the line. For example, we've engaged with producers where they assumed they needed the permission of the artist to be able to take their share. And then also the artist said, but we paid you.
Yeah.
And then
what more do you want?
What more do you want? But then many of them didn't follow the law, what the law says. But in most of the detail, the fine print says, unless specifically you have stated that this is a work for hire and you have forfeited, you have a claim. So 99% of the contracts, agreements with the artist pays and they get a receipt. And then they assume that receipt is proof that they own 100% of the rights, which is not true. The law doesn't look at it that way. Receipt just proves you
paid me for the job.
There was a transaction for whatever it is. There was a transaction, but copyright has the different layer to that whole discussion.
And you know, Jeff, there is an interesting aspect that most artists in Uganda do not understand, and this is the fact that art does not only stop at being an artist. Even here, when you are under the copyright law, a photographer who takes pictures around town, around the most exclusive events, etc., that picture they took, they own it.
I agree.
Yes.
Yeah? Even I, who's working on TV, a producer, a camera person, working for these media companies, they have to be able to own certain aspects of their work. But that is not understood in Uganda. And you go back to the fact, an example of whereby if someone has employed you, they are paying you a salary, they have paid you for your work as a producer, music industry, you are an actor on a set, you've been paid, you're done. So does that go back to not understanding contracts again?
It goes to not understanding the essence of copyright, which is founded on the term fixing. Fixing means if you create, like I take the picture, you are the one who has put that creation into existence, and automatically you own. That's how the law works. That copyright is not doesn't come from registration. It comes from creating. The moment you create, you own.
Yeah, and that's the example that Andrew was giving and saying that artists will come and say, "But I paid you. You came and took pictures at my wedding, but I paid you, so you don't own these pictures."
That's just a receipt to prove that there was a transaction. But copyright works differently. In fact, there's what they call the Kampala Protocol. It's the one that one of the treaties that reasserts that when you create, you own. In fact, it goes ahead to say that, that when you go to register, say with URSB, and you say register copyright, proof of registration is not proof of ownership. Even in the law, it is stated very clearly. Most people think that when you register, it is now proof of ownership. No, it is only proof of registration. It means you're the first person to claim that work. If another party comes with additional proof of ownership, then they can what? They can sort of negate that registration. They can take away the value of that previous registration. All they need is proof. Like, for example, if it's it was my camera, and the cameras usually have what they call metadata. The metadata, every time you take a picture, is generated by the camera itself, and you have proof that it came from your camera on a specific date. Then that's it. The same with music. If you have proof that that you created it, let's say for producers, and they have proof that they composed, maybe they were recording the sessions as the whole process was going on, that's enough to get things started in your claim. So the copyright is not given to you by anybody. It's given to you by yourself by virtue of
the moment you create.
Creating it.
Okay, so I've been told we have run out of time. Andrew, what's your last comment on this issue today?
One, I still believe it's a win. I still believe it's a win for the industry. I just hope the people that are celebrating it the most do their due diligence on their side, because artists are the biggest, they always complain about copyright and the copyright laws, but then they're still the biggest abusers. One, when it comes to working with other people's works, and two, when it comes to paying the people that actually help them create the work. They are the biggest abusers. So I wish they fulfill their part as well.
Well, Jeff, your last word, please.
My last word is I'm excited about this. One of the wins I'm excited about is enforcement. There's going to be penalties of up to 50 million.
Oh.
And up to 10 years.
Abuse the law.
Yes, that will, we think, might scare some people from doing certain things. And my biggest loss is that we had lobbied heavily for what they called private copy remuneration, and it was not included. We are hoping that we are going to still push, make one last push, and hopefully it will be reinstated. And the rest is good.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. I am sure there is more to talk about, and every Friday we shall be doing that and digesting through the arts industry in Uganda and what's happening there. Now, to continue the conversation, I beg your pardon, go to our social media platforms, that is on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. Use the hashtag #morning@NTV and look out for NTV Uganda. Idris Matusega is my name. We are taking a short break. We are back with more on Morning at NTV.